don't make me wait, 'cause I don't wanna break, no, I don't wanna fall. When you're next to me, content, I'm not afraid to be. You don't make me wait, and never let me break, you never let me fall. Darling, hold my hand. Cause I don't wanna walk on my own anymore, but you understand. Cause I don't wanna walk alone. I'm ready for this, there's no denying. I'm ready for this, you stop me falling. I'm ready for this, I need you holding. I'm ready for this, so darling, won't you hold my hand? I wanna follow where she goes. I think about her and she knows it. I wanna let it take control. 'Cause every time that she gets close, yeah, she pulls me in enough to keep me guessing. And maybe I should stop and start confessing. Confessing, yeah. Oh, I've been shaking. I love it when you go crazy. You take all my inhibitions. Baby, there's nothing holding me back. You take me places that tear up my reputation, manipulate my decisions. Baby, there's nothing holding me back. There's nothing holding me back. There's nothing holding me back. She says that she's never afraid. Just picture everybody naked. She really doesn't like to wait. Not really into hesitation. Pulls me in enough to keep me guessing. Oh, and maybe I should stop and start confessing. Confessing, yeah. Oh, I've been shaking. I love it when you go crazy. You take all my inhibitions. Baby, there's nothing holding me back. You take me places that tear up my reputation, manipulate my decisions. Baby, there's nothing holding me back. There's nothing holding me back. 'Cause if we lost our minds and we took it way too far, I know we'd be alright. I know we would be alright if you were by my side. And we stumbled in the dark, I know we'd be alright. I know we would be alright. 'Cause if we lost our minds and we took it way too far, I know we'd be alright. I know we would be alright if you were by my side. We stumbled in the dark, I know we'd be alright.
Please take your seats. Our program is about to begin.
I've been shaking. I love it when you go crazy. You take all my inhibitions. Baby, there's nothing holding me back. You take me places that tear up my reputation, manipulate my decisions.
Please welcome to the stage Risa Fury, Director of Marketing and Communications for Stantec and Chair of Women in Mining Canada.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion session. Excuse me. Thank you all for being here. Before we get started, I want to give you a moment to locate the exit closest to you. In the unlikely event that we need to evacuate the building, please exit through the door closest to you, proceed down the stairs, and out of the building. I also want to draw your attention to the Women in Mining annual meeting that will be held October 21st through 23rd in Salt Lake City. This event is not exclusive to women, So gentlemen, this is your cordial invitation to join the fun. Emily King and Ashley Chancellor are out in the audience, if you can maybe stand up. If you want any information, they can hand it to you. Mining is an exciting industry that has benefited immensely from diverse perspectives, talents, and skills. Yet as an industry, we want to do better at embracing and including diverse populations, and this session is just a small example of that. We've heard during sessions this week about how mining is facing ever more complex challenges during this very interesting time of change. Today, we're going to delve into some of the ways that companies and individuals can prioritize diversity, and we'll talk about inclusion. What is needed for these diverse populations and ideas to feel welcome and to stick around? Our goal for this session is to provide a better understanding of the state of diversity and inclusion in mining, and through discussion with our panelists, we'll shed light on some of the ways inclusion and diversity can be harnessed to create value and positive outcomes for mining and beyond. During today's sessions, we'll have 3 speakers. They'll make some opening remarks, and then I'll invite them back to the stage for a panel discussion. Time permitting, we will take audience questions. Questions can be submitted through the slido.com app on the screen. And you want to use the event code MINExpo 2021. If your question is for a particular panelist, please include that information. So we'll get started with our first speaker. Catherine Jacobs is a managing director and North America mining lead at Accenture. Her focus has primarily been on strategic digital transformation programs that help companies leverage analytics, mobility, IoT, and virtual operations. In addition to mining, she has experience working across other asset-intensive industries, including energy, utilities, agribusiness, and chemicals. Catherine has a master's degree in technology and innovation management and bachelor's degrees in science and business management from the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. Welcome, Catherine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to join you all. What I'm going to share with you is really focused on 2 areas today. Firstly, everyone's witnessed how much the industry has been changing over the last decade, whether it be driven by new technology, adjustments in CapEx and greenfield programs, an increased focus on ESG obligations, or whether it just be a change in the production chain itself. And that has also all had an impact on the workforce within the sector. And then secondly to that, what we've seen through the course of the pandemic is that's been exacerbated even further. And it's created a very unique opportunity for the industry to think about how do we deepen our focus and culture around inclusion and innovation. So I'll touch a little bit as well today on what are companies doing to take advantage of that. So where I thought I'd start is, and I won't focus too much on the content here, but just kind of paint the picture of what's happened in the last 18 months a little bit. So obviously, as we went through the pandemic, the social distancing measures, lockdown measures drove kind of this anywhere, anytime office concept as the new norm. And what that also did was drive a focus on needing to think about new productive ways of working remotely when there was less people physically located at site. So whether it be thinking about shared planning, maintenance planning capabilities across sites, whether it be an adjustment in the shift schedules, adjustments in the fly-out rosters, all of that was readjusted. The second thing that happened was there was a resurgence in new skills. So there was a more heavy emphasis on communication, collaboration, social emotional skills, and aspects that sit around that is a leadership dimension. That coupled with new technologies, so if we think about mobile technologies around connectivity into the field, tablets for real-time visibility, that also increased. There was also a new focus on people's trust in data. So for less situational awareness, there was a focus on how do we think about using data and information and analysis for operational decision making. And then the other thing that occurred was, as we think about the adjustment of people working remotely versus people based on site, there was an increased diversity of jobs that were remote, and concepts around the idea of operating centers and the virtualization of those became a fast reality. So that's kind of really what's transpired in the last 18 months. And now I know I just haven't said anything that you aren't already aware of. But it was obviously a challenging situation for all of us, but what it's helped us prove is a couple of things. Firstly, it's shown us that there's no longer a geographical or biological barrier to work. And then the second thing it showed us is that technology, and so I work with Accenture, obviously we have a heavy technology focus, so I can't go without saying something about technology. But what it's shown us is that technology is a greater leveler of skills, and it suddenly unlocked the potential for many people to do roles and have skills that was never previously comprehended. So that's kind of the two things that have been shown as part of the new norm. So when that new norm becomes sticky, and part of what you see as the data points on the right-hand side here is, obviously at the start of the pandemic, everything pretty much went to virtual. There's a slow progression back, but likely we'll get to this middle ground. So what happened as part of this new normal, which is likely to be sticky for the future, there's a couple of areas of important focus. At the top left there is about diversify your talent ecosystem. So it's not only about pulling in new skills to replace roles that were made redundant through the period of the pandemic, or reshuffling of remote work versus on-site work. It's also about pulling in skills needed from adjacent industries. So there's been a shift from mechanical into analytical skills. There's been a shift from kind of less technology into more technology heavily monitoring control skills. There's also been a focus on thinking about crowdsourcing. So many of you probably seen some of the examples around how crowdsourcing's already been used to increase recovery rates for rare earth, or thinking about geological data sets for exploration. So that's been able to ratchet up even further. The second area on here is around the multi-pronged approach to skilling. So what we've seen here is it's not only the traditional type, in the job field type training, safety certification, it's also moving into the multidisciplinary areas and the immersive technologies and how you think about aspects of over-the-shoulder coaching, data literacy, digital literacy. And I know clients that I've been working with through the last 2 years, they very quickly had to pivot into building the skills across the breadth of their workforce in those areas. The bottom right here is around reconnecting with the full individual and every individual. So an employee is a member of an organization, a company, a role they perform. That's just one dimension. What the pandemic has taught us is it's also about looking about not only the physical, financial, but also the emotional and kind of reward system around what people do day to day to keep them engaged and operating with purpose. And on the top right here is around a culture of equality and inclusion. So what that really means is helping to double down on that sense of accountability, the sense of purpose. And this is the area, given the topic of the hour here, that I want to spend a little bit more time on. So what we have done within Accenture over the last 3 years, each year we've completed a research study called Getting to Equal. And what we've done as part of that is we've surveyed about 35,000 participants each year globally, covering about 25 countries. It's covering every industry sector, so mining is a component of that, but it covers every industry. And what we've been looking for is what are the drivers of a workplace culture? And we've separated out about 40 different dimensions. And then we've applied a series of statistical analysis around those to determine what's the key drivers of really what's driving a culture within an organization. So these have kind of been grouped into 3 categories. So empowering environment is the top of the list across the board, all industries, all companies that were surveyed. What an empowering environment is about is one that trusts employees, respects individuals, and offers the freedom to be creative and to train and work flexibly. So trust breeds results and innovation. Trust breeds autonomy, accountability, freedom to operate. The second one on here is about bold leadership. So culture starts from the top. It's about making culture a similar strategic priority and business imperative, similar to financial or profitability or operational. It's also about setting targets, publishing those, measuring those, holding leadership accountable. And then lastly, as part of the bold leadership, it's back to that bit about trust and autonomy. It's about enabling the leadership team and the entire enterprise workforce to operate and flourish based on the ideas that they bring and the results that they can create. And then the third one here is about comprehensive actions. So policies and practices that are family-friendly, support all genders, and are bias-free in attracting and retaining people. So setting targets that we just talked about, that is essential. But really, to take that to the next level, it's about how do you think about the other dimensions? How do you open the door for people to operate with the autonomy, make decisions? How do you provide all channels of access, accessibility to the full workforce, responsive to all frequencies for how people operate? How do you work with your inside organization and also your external network to bring that all together? So this is the concept of the culture of equality that we've been working through as part of this research study for the last 3 years. So why is this important? A culture of equality is a business necessity because it's table stakes for innovation. And it's table stakes for business growth and business viability. And innovation is also not just about bringing the best minds to the table, it's also about creating the environment and the space and the skills for people to flourish. So those 2 things need to work hand in hand. So there's a couple of data points just in here that I'll just cover off, just to give some examples of what we've been seeing come in this area. So the first little table here you see on the left is what it's showing us is that more equal cultures, companies with more equal cultures have a 6 times higher innovation mindset. So that's the first one. The second one here is that diversity is a building block, but equality or inclusion is the multiplier effect. And what we see is that more equal and diverse cultures have about 11 times higher innovation mindset than those that are less equal and less diverse. And then the third piece here is that we're at an inflection point. So what we did in our survey over the last 3 years, and we're likely to be doing it again this year, we just haven't published the 2021 results yet. What we see is that when we interview the business leader group versus the employee base, there is a perception gap in culture. So what it shows us is that business leaders believe that they are empowering their employees to innovate, to grow, etc., to a greater extent than what the employees themselves believe is occurring. So that's 76 versus 42%. So these are actually all just from the published articles. The sources are at the bottom, but anyone who was more interested could take a look at Accenture.com and would find these data points and a description that sits around them. So that's kind of why, just back to the equality and inclusion is a necessity because it's a driver and table stakes for innovation. What do we then see as the key workforce culture elements driving that innovation mindset? So it really comes down to a couple of key priority areas. There's one around a flexible work-life balance. There's another one around flexibility and training expertise, ability to build skills in areas that are of interest, broaden your skill set based beyond your day-to-day particular role. And then the third one is autonomy to operate and be put in the ability to make experimental decisions kind of as part of your day-to-day job. So they're kind of the three areas that really come through as part of this study. Interestingly, you'll see here that nearly all of these across the board sit in their empowering environment bit. So it really comes back again to autonomy, trust-breeding innovation, flexibility to operate, and willingness to step up and take some action. I've got about 2 minutes left, so I'll just close out with some thoughts here. The topic of my presentation was the changing faces of mining. So where we started was covering the future-ready workforce elements, many of which we've seen kind of on overdrive during the period of the pandemic. Many of those are now today's reality. It's unlikely that we'll go back to the former environment that we were operating under. So there's even higher expectation for companies to kind of double down and really drive these through. Diversity and culture of equality have a combined effect. So diversity is a building block. The culture element is a multiplier. And those two things work hand in hand. The secret to innovation, your workplace culture. Culture, again, culture is table stakes for innovation. And that helps drive business viability and growth. And then lastly here, culture should be as important as financial growth, talent, operational productivity, any of the other strategic priorities that a business operates under day to day, all the way from an individual level up to the executive level. So that's what I had here today to share. I've kind of covered a lot of different concepts here. The next two panelists that will come out, Carl and Letitia, they'll actually start to bring some of this to life with some very specific examples around the individual companies that they operate with day to day. Thank you for having me join, and when we come back out, happy to answer questions that you all have.
Thank you, Catherine. Our next speaker is Carl Weiss. He is Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Caterpillar, where he is responsible for integrated components and solutions. In his role, he leads development and implementation of the enterprise technology strategy, including R&D investment, product development, new technology and new product introduction, simulation, and validation. He's also responsible for the company's lean product source planning. Carl has lived and worked in both Switzerland and China, and holds degrees in agricultural engineering from Purdue University and an MBA from Northern Illinois University. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you, Risa. Well, good afternoon. Good to see everyone here today. I'm happy to be here representing Caterpillar. I'm happy to work for a company that has strong values relative to diversity and inclusion. We've embedded them in our values in action for many years, and we're still on a journey, just like many other companies, but I'm proud of that journey and where we're headed. So why are we on that journey? You know, it starts with all of us. We want to be treated the way we want to treat others just as we hope will be treated, right? So being valued, ensuring that you treat everyone with equal opportunity is a basic human need and desire. But more than that, just like Catherine said, I do believe, and we believe, equality equals innovation. As Chief Technology Officer for Caterpillar, that's key for us as we look at our workforce and ensure we have diverse ideas and that we include them so that we are more innovative. But maybe a little more personally, I met my wife at Caterpillar. We were both engineers in training together, and through her career, I've seen her experiences, both good and bad. And I've seen how engaged employees are when they're treated with respect, with equality, and how they can be discouraged and maybe less productive when they're not. And so for all those reasons, we've been on a journey for several years to be more inclusive and have a more diverse workforce. Another form of diversity that's very important to us is our global diversity, our cultural diversity. I've had the opportunity, as was mentioned, to both live in Europe and cover Africa as a service engineer, and to work in China. And in both cases, my family was able to come with me and live in that culture. And the important thing for us is that we know as we localize the talent and localize the leadership in these places so that it better reflects the diversity of our customers, we are more successful. It's not very surprising, I suppose, that because the workforce in those areas know the local folks, know how business is done, that we're more successful. But it's a journey, and a journey we've continued. We have almost 100,000 employees worldwide. And while we began in the United States, you can see we've become much more diverse over the several years that we've become more and more global. And as we build global teams, you can see that diversity of thought come and provide more innovation and better solutions for our customers around the world. One of the things I'm most proud of and most engaged in on our diversity journey is our employee resource groups. Our first employee resource group was formed in 2002. It was our Caterpillar African American Network. And since then, you can see that we have 14 groups now, representing almost 12,000 employees, so a fair percentage of our organization. I'm personally involved in two of them. I have been executive sponsor first for Women Initiative Network, and then after 3 or 4 years, I became the executive sponsor for our Caterpillar Chinese Resource Group because of my experience in China. During my tenure as the executive sponsor of WIN, the WIN organization did some tremendous things. They began setting up a curriculum for internal use to help women come together, talk about their experiences, and learn from each other and become leaders through cooperating and leaning on each other. They also developed a Men as Allies curriculum that spread across the organization and really helped the men in our organization see things through the eyes as an ally to our women. Further, they developed a Women in Leadership conference where the leaders, female leaders from Caterpillar and the female up-and-coming leaders from our dealerships across the world came together to learn about leadership and to collaborate with each other. And those relationships have gone on for years now and been very helpful for both our Caterpillar leaders and our leaders at our dealerships. So we're very proud of those things. Our Lambda chapter developed a safe space curriculum to teach throughout Caterpillar to help all employees understand how they could be supportive allies to the LGBTIQ community. So those are just a few examples of the good work that these organizations have done. Not only that, though, in the past year, as we've seen social unrest grow in parts of our country, but also across the world, Caterpillar donated $1 million, split equally between the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Equal Justice Initiative organization, to help in those organizations and help our society in general with the problems around diversity. And finally, I want to mention that we support and signed on to support a group of like-minded companies for the 110 initiative, which is that we would hire, upskill, promote 1 million African Americans collectively across the next 10 years to make sure that they have family-sustaining jobs. Our employee resource groups were instrumental in much of those actions, and we're very proud and happy to have that active group of employees in our team. So that's the grassroots approach, and a very important approach. But none of that would be successful across such a large organization if we didn't as well have top-down support. Over the past few years, we've seen a big change in the makeup of our leadership team. So you can see that on the left, our board of directors now is over half made up of diverse folks that are able to help us in ways that we didn't expect. Further, our executive office, so the CEO's direct reports, including my boss, Denise Johnson, who's president of our Resource Industries division, 63% of that group are now diverse. And you can see that has driven culture changes throughout our organizations. Examples of that, as we look to promote individuals above a certain level, diverse panels of interviewers are necessary to make those decisions on who will get those promotions. So it has helped level the playing field to ensure that we're not using our biases that we may or may not know we have in making decisions relative to promotions. That's just one example. As we go out to universities and hire, similarly, we're focusing in on those organizations at those universities that can give us a rich talent pool that we maybe normally didn't attract. You know, when I was coming into Caterpillar, and you know, I came to Caterpillar for the big yellow machines. I enjoyed that kind of product and that kind of job. As we think through attracting the right talent for a more diverse, set of viewpoints, we've got to think of what attracts females, what attracts folks with other backgrounds than the one I grew up with. And so it has really helped us change how we recruit. It's changed who we send to do the recruiting. And that's been very effective at working to increase the amount of diversity in our workforce. So we're very pleased with that progress. You know, I talked about our journey for the past 20 years. You know, the first employee resource group in 2002. But I would say we've even accelerated more in the past year. In April, we published our first diversity and inclusion report. And so I encourage you to go out to caterpillar.com and look at that report, see what our journey has been, see where we're headed. And I'm very proud to say that we are now publishing that report, and you'll see that on an annual basis. Additionally, we had our first corporate-wide diversity and inclusion summit. It was led by our CEO, Jim Umpleby, and many of the leaders through that summit were folks that were part of our ERGs, that were leaders in our ERGs, telling the organization how they're engaged, how important it is, and how we can move forward together and grow our diversity and our total inclusion and effectiveness. The other thing I want to mention that might have escaped notice is we recently signed an agreement with BHP Billiton on moving forward on electrification together. But what you might not have seen in the announcement is that we're also collaborating on how to design our products and our solutions so that it fits a more diverse workforce. How do we make sure that how we maintain equipment, the size of components that we manage, are keeping a more diverse workforce in mind? And I think that was very important to both BHP Billiton and to Caterpillar, so I'm very proud of that. The final thing I'll mention is, it starts very young. We need a more diverse workforce. We want a more diverse workforce. And so we're promoting STEM education in our middle schools and high schools. Over 1,000 Caterpillar employees every year take part in organizations like First Robotics, the Lego League, to help instill the desire for STEM education with a more diverse part of our student population. So it really begins very early. It continues through recruiting. It continues through involvement in employee resource groups. It includes promotions into new, more impactful leadership positions. And it includes leadership at our executive and board levels. So we're on the journey. We are not close to done, but I'm happy with the progress we're making, and I'm looking forward to that next phase. I've got a daughter that's now 22, and her ability to ensure that she has an equal playing field as she enters the workforce is very important to me, and I think that is what drives that personal connection, really drives the culture change that we're talking about. So thank you, and again, I encourage you, if you want to learn more, to go out to our website and look at the diversity and inclusion report that we just published this year. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carl. Our last speaker is Letitia Gietzen. She is Director of Public and Community Relations at PolyMet Mining. She is a fourth-generation miner with over 20 years' experience in environmental management, government affairs, community relations, and her main responsibility is community relations and government affairs. But due to the small team at PolyMet, her duties also include workforce development and corporate compliance. Letitia has a Master's of Arts degree in management from College of St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota, and a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering, and with an emphasis on the environment from University of North Dakota. Welcome, Letitia.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. I'm talking about my experience and our project. So Polymet Mining is a company that is going through the permitting process to open up a new mine in northeastern Minnesota, and to talk about some of the unique challenges. Our hope and goal is to develop a world-class mine and a world-class workforce. We have a really unique situation, and we're able to use an existing facility. So the picture on the screen is actually a tailings basin that we'll be able to reuse. We're reusing the infrastructure and processing new material. So a little bit of background. Again, northeastern Minnesota. We've been mining for over 130 years. We're a traditional iron mine. There's been many companies. We currently have about 6 that are operating. But we also have a vast resource of copper nickel. And so our project, Polymet, is going after copper nickel. We have other companies that are also in various stages of development and exploration. And we, at Polymet, received all of our permits several years ago, and unfortunately are tied up in litigation right now. And so as I talk about this, the next slides, it's really looking to the future development of our workforce. And we'll be hiring over 350 employees directly. So every mine project, mine company has their own unique challenges. And so as we look at the demographics in our area in northeastern Minnesota, it's a very aging population. We have about 40% that are over 60. And when you look at the demographic of people of color, in our whole region, we have 9% people of color. And when you take that 9% and break it down and look at where they're working, they're not in the mining industry. Very few people of color working in the mining industry. We need to do better. It appears, looking at the demographics of women in mining, it really feels like we're doing better. When you do, I did a quick Google search looking at the firsts, and a couple of really big ones in the last couple of years. First woman CEO in a Mexican mine. Minerals Council appoints their first woman president in 131 years. And in Minnesota, the Iron Mining Association has its first woman leading that board of directors. So it really feels like there's been progress. But when you look into the specifics of the numbers, it doesn't go all the way through the organizations, and we have a long ways to go. Looking at Canadian mining companies, only 16% of women on the board of directors. When you look at executives, only 14% of executives in mining companies in Canada are made up of women. So then when you look at women in general in the mining industry, in the United States, we're only at 10% women in the industry. And in Minnesota, we're even a little worse, at 8%. So we have a lot of opportunity for growth. And I think that there's different challenges, and I'll get into a little bit of these, between people of color and women in the industry. But a lot of room for growth. So what should we do? So my background, I'm a 4th generation Iron Range miner. Our area was really developed, and the people that live there were brought in because of mining. My family moved here in the early 1900s to work in the mining industry. And so in the early 1900s, it was a huge melting pot. But as years went on and mining companies shrink, we've shed people rather than bring people in. And our communities are very closed-minded. And so I worked at a previous mining company that did a lot of recruiting in the southern US and brought some students in. They were very white, but they themselves didn't feel welcomed into the community because they're very close-knit and outsiders coming in. And so when we talk about the potential of bringing in people of color to an area that is primarily white, it's a bigger issue than just the mining companies. To me, it's an issue where we need to work with our communities and educate our communities that want to grow, but are concerned about what that growth is going to look like. And so to me, it's a big issue, but it's one of the entire region, and that can't just be solved by the mining companies. It has to be done with partnerships. We have a university, a group of community colleges that has some really innovative programs in engineering, and they are actually working throughout the US to bring students in. And their program, they have 50% people of color in their program. And they actually go out and work on co-ops in engineering in our area and throughout the United States. So it's innovative programs like that. They're award-winning. They're one of top 10 innovative schools in the world, and have been recognized for that. So it's partnerships with groups like that that will help us solve some of these issues. But inclusion is really the essential piece of this. People need to feel included. We can bring people in, but if they don't feel welcomed and included into the communities, they aren't going to stay. And again, women in mining, I believe, is a little bit different issue, and the previous speakers touched on this a little bit. Women need to see themselves in the fields. We don't see a lot of women in engineering. I'm an engineer, and when I went to school 20 plus years ago, it was about 20% women in engineering, and that number is about the same today. So we need to figure out how to get to kids younger and get them exposed to STEM and get them excited about going into the fields. There's also needs to be some changes, I think, in the companies. We need to provide more opportunities for women to mentor young women in the industry, and career development opportunities. So bring them in and show them a path to continue to move forward. Diversity, inclusion, and unconscious bias training. And I know that those are, unconscious bias has been talked about a lot, but I know if you go through the survey, it's actually quite surprising. The things that you have in your mind that you don't really realize until you go through that training. It's really quite eye-opening. And again, we're promoting a culture. We heard a lot about culture in the previous presentations as well. It's really changing that culture. We need to look at things a little bit different, look at gender-neutral titles and job descriptions. And really, we've seen this in the numbers that I mentioned in women for the last 20 years have gone up and down, but 2020 with the pandemic was a huge hit. Numbers went down, women went home. There wasn't enough childcare opportunities with the pandemic. And so one of the big things is really providing that family-friendly policies, especially for mid-career women that are having children. So as we continue to move forward and try to develop a project in northern Minnesota, I believe we can do it, but it's gonna have to be much larger than just the companies themselves. And we need to work through those communities. We need to make sure to be inclusive. We need to work on that early education, intervention, and I believe that we can accomplish that through all of that work. And so we're going to bring the panel discussion back up here and answer any questions that we may have.
So panelists, thank you again for your interesting and engaging presentations. We'll go through a few questions, and if there are questions from the audience, go ahead and submit those through the Slido site, hashtag MINExpo21. Catherine, I'd like to start with you. We've heard a lot about the future of mining, and we all know that it's going to be different. But what are the types of skills that mine workers need, and what types of jobs will they be doing in the future?
Yeah, good question. And I touched on some of this a little earlier. I think the kind of all the traditional skills around the mechanical skills, the operators, the machine operators, the mechanics, etc. A lot of those traditional skills will still be required, but where it's going to evolve into is really thinking about, again, I keep going back to technology, but what technology drives is an increased focus on needing monitoring and control type skills, so those process engineering type skills. A more heavy emphasis on data analysis, data insights is another big topic. And then I think that the third one is probably around, back to some of those softer areas that we've been talking about around culture and, thinking about leadership skills, the communication, collaboration skills. There's this hybrid work environment of both remote and in-person work. As that kind of continues to be sticky, how do you really drive that productivity and collaboration, communication type of environment? I think those are the areas. I know the World Economic Forum does a job report study each year, and they kind of profile by sector, and the two that have been highlighted in the mining sector as critical for the future are really around that process control engineering type domain, and also in the space of data science and data analysis and information, critical thinking type skills. Yeah.
So obviously the role of technology in the future of mining will play large.
Yeah.
But will robots take all of our jobs? And how do you recommend that students and older generations prepare for this new reality?
Yeah. I think I always think about the evolution of robotics or technology or the jobs themselves. I think safety is always top priority, right? So anything that is improving safety and taking people out of harm's way, I think that's always going to be a focus area for jobs that may move more from manual activity into automated type activity. And I think that's a win for the industry, right? Because it's back to that, safety is the top priority. I think by and large, most of the other elements of, operator mechanical type roles will stay as is. I think it's back to the point about the, critical thinking, monitoring control is really the role that the human will play in the future, even if there is an element of automation that sits around the equipment itself. And obviously Carl, with what they do at Caterpillar, they're continuing to drive productivity improvement, additional automation and other technology control elements around their equipment. And that just all enables the operators in the field to do their job even better and more productively and efficiently, and allow them to focus on the true decision-making and value-add activities. So that's kind of my perspective. It always goes back to safety is the big priority. If there's elements of automation that are going to help with that, that should always be a focus industry, a top priority for the industry.
Carl, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I could add to that. I think, as I travel around, or used to before COVID, travel around and visit customers, everyone has their own labor constraints to deal with. And I think a lot of the technology that we're developing will enable a lot of different things. I mean, one example on age diversity, I met a gentleman who had spent most of his career operating a dozer in a mine site, and as he approached retirement age, he was ready to retire because it wore him out to ride that dozer all day. So as our customer put him in a remote station in a trailer, he was able to get out of that cab, have a nice, comfortable place from which to work, and not only that, he was able to run 3 dozers at once instead of 1, and he just loved his job. And the best part of it, maybe related to this conference as well, is he's recruited his granddaughter, and she's becoming an operator.
That's what we'd like to hear. So on the topic of generational inclusion, Letitia, I was wondering if you have any experience in this realm, and if there are some things that you've seen, succeed or fail, and if there were some learnings around the generational inclusion.
Well, I think some of the comments that were just made are going to provide an opportunity to excite young people about being in the industry, right? I mean, you walk around the show and see some of the technology that's being used and the artificial intelligence, and I have a 16-year-old boy. I'm like, that would get him excited about the mining industry, sitting and controlling like they do now. And so I really think that that's going to help us as we continue to attract young people into the industry. But I also think it's really important, especially for in northern Minnesota, our specific example, we have an aging workforce, and how do we keep them engaged and keep them in the workforce? And so to be able to understand the differences in the technology, learnings of the different generations, it's really important to understand how they look at it differently and really make everybody feel comfortable. And using some of the younger people to help get some of the older generation comfortable with that technology is some of the stuff that we've seen that's worked really well, because there's different levels of comfort, and the ability of young people to teach old people, or it's really been really helpful.
Awesome.
I think just to add to that, the other area, so Accenture's a decently big company, so we do a lot of graduate recruitment, and then our business analyst pool kind of has 1 to 3 years work experience. The industry doubling down on the ESG agenda, I'm also seeing that make a difference around what talent is coming through, the college system and interested in actually working in, but not only the mining sector, but more broadly the resources sector. And I think that's a transition that I have noticed strongly in the last probably 12 to 18 months, that we are bringing in graduates who do want to focus on helping mining or the resources sector because of the renewed emphasis on ESG and the commitments and kind of renewed focus around that. So I think that's really making a difference as well.
And if I can just add, I think the fact that the materials are going into helping reduce greenhouse gases, right?
Yeah.
So renewable energy, I think that's also getting kids excited about the opportunity to help with some of the issues we have going forward.
Yeah, I think when you tell the story too around, so I spent a lot of time as well in the copper sector. Copper is obviously a raw material to biomedical products or electric vehicles and other components. When you draw that linkage across the value chain, that also generates excitement of I can be part of that value chain for what's future growth sectors in the electric vehicle market, for example. And that really, when you tell that story, that does have impact.
Carl, you talked a lot about ERGs, employee resource groups. And I was wondering if you could give us, the secret sauce that makes these ERGs work, and how you connect those ERGs effectively to the business so that they're additive and not just complementary.
Yeah, I think the secret sauce begins and ends. It's really a virtuous circle where the company provides employees with a means by which they can help each other, interact, have common experiences together. And then that group of people helps the company become better through things that I discussed relative to the Women in Leadership program, the Safe Space curriculum for the Lambda chapter. But what we've evolved toward is even a deeper connection to the business. So I talked about the Caterpillar China Resource Group. We've got a sizable business in China, and we have problems that we're trying to solve for our customers. And so we tapped into that CCRG as an acronym, the China Resource Group, and enlisted their help to be innovative, to think of solutions, and to reach out to their connections that they have in the industry already. And it was a big game changer for the project, but it also gave those employees special recognition for maybe future leadership roles, for recognition in front of the company's leaders. And so it was a real win-win-win, the company, the employees, and our customers. So that's how we're trying to connect them really into the business and help all parts of the circle.
Catherine, Letitia, anything to add?
I don't have enough specific experience with that, to comment, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Let's see, Letitia, as a woman who has spent 20 years in the mining industry, what have been your most complex challenges? Do you have examples that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, I started out, my entire career has been in mining, And it was a dual-fold first challenge. As a young woman starting out, it was hard to be taken seriously. And so you have to try to navigate through that and get to the right people and find the right people to help you. And so it was not only being a woman, but also being a young woman in the industry. One really interesting example is my husband's also in mining, and we both started about the same time. I actually had some better advantages because I was not threatened. You know, people didn't find me as a threat because I was not going to be taking their job. And so I got better opportunities for people to try to walk through the process and teach me different things where my husband didn't experience it. And so, so that was really interesting and very cool.
Awesome, awesome. Let's see, I think we'll move to some of the audience questions. There was a lot of discussion about equity, but none about pay equity. Can any of you speak to what you're doing to ensure there is equitable compensation across your organizations? Carl, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. You know, there's a lot of aspects to why that exists, and so we've got a multi-pronged approach, I think, to address some of those root causes. For one thing, just to give you an example, as we go through our annual pay increases, we certainly look at the spectrum of those pay increases in many different ways, and one of those we do look at and make sure is equitable is along diversity lines, male, female, other ways to slice diversity. So we do keep an eye on that to make sure there's, you know, not disparity. The other is, I talked earlier about another big change in pay is when you get a promotion to a bigger role. So ensuring we have diverse panels that decide who gets those promotions is another attempt at working at the root cause of those. And then the third thing I would say is longevity in a career matters in pay because you get more increases, you get more opportunities for advancement. And you know, with our pipeline, we've noticed that in the middle, we have a constriction. In other words, you know, early in a career, we seem to be, as far as I can see, equitable. Late in the career, I think women get, or other ways to measure diversity, get the opportunities as well. But in the middle, where family is involved, whether we're not maybe as flexible as we should be to help keep folks in the workforce in that middle part of the career, I think that has had an impact, and we're trying to address it with flexibility, with ability to work part-time and keep connected to the business so that we can welcome them back, male or female, when they're ready. So we're trying to address what we believe are root causes of the inequity, and in that way address it.
Catherine, can you comment on Accenture?
Yeah, I mean, Accenture as a service provider to the industry is probably going to, so within, we basically have compensation set by career level. So that's the way that we drive equitability, which is agnostic of, you know, geography to a certain extent, gender, race, etc. I think we also have a schemes, it depends a little bit what part of the business you reside into, if you're in consulting, if you're operations, or if you're an internal role. But we have a quite rigorous performance evaluation process that we do run throughout the year. So there's ongoing opportunity to kind of gather feedback, express what you're interested in terms of areas that you would like to grow, skills you would like to develop. And that is it's always a two-way conversation, a 360-degree conversation almost. So I think that provides an ongoing opportunity as well to kind of make sure that you are working towards not only what you are interested in, but what the business is looking for you to do, that you will then be evaluated against again at the end of the year. So that's kind of how we look at it. I think interestingly, the research study that I was talking about that Accenture's been conducting, that Getting to Equal, one of the other data points that I did not talk about was they did actually compare pay equity against other dimensions. And what they found was the pay equity was actually less of a consideration compared to, freedom to operate or ability to innovate when it came to people's decision to say, am I enjoying my job? Do I want to stay with this company, et cetera? So that was kind of an interesting data point for me as well, that pay equity ultimately was less of a consideration compared to some of the other things that we've been talking about around innovation and empowerment and autonomy to operate and ability to grow and evolve the role that you're in.
So there was a question, it's no longer on the screen here, but there was a question about the survey.
Yep.
And whether or not there was something particular about mining that came up in the data that was especially interesting. You mentioned that the survey you conducted that included multiple industries. Was there anything unique about the mining industry that you saw in the results?
Nothing unique. Interestingly, when you did the profile across, you break it down by subsector, there was a strong parallel pattern from one industry to the next. So it was kind of almost agnostic of industry. The same results came through in the survey. Yeah. I think the mining sector for sure, and this wasn't part of the survey, but obviously, most of the companies in the industry do have global operations, and I think that perhaps might add an additional level of diversity and workforce demographic that needs to be considered above and beyond what some other industries would be, just based on the geographical spread that the industry operates under. So I think that gives it heightened tension, but also gives it greater visibility and awareness and ability for companies to react and respond.
Carl, I think this question is for you. How does the U.S. compare to China or Africa in terms of diversity?
Well, that's a good question. Everywhere I've traveled or lived has diversity issues. I mean, they're just a little different, I think. In China, I would say maybe not dissimilar to North America in this way, but I would say some of the older population isn't as diverse in their thoughts on male-female roles. I think the younger generation are much more equitable in their thoughts about what roles should a woman or a man play, who should stay home with the kids. So I've seen that shift in China, just as you see it happening in other parts of the world. They also have different ethnic groups. You might have read about some in the news. And so there is real concern for treating some populations poorly compared to others that I think they're dealing with. I think Africa is maybe the most diverse continent in the world, with being the cradle of civilization. A lot of different civilizations started there, and so I think they deal with diversity issues in many of the same ways that other parts of the world do. So I think there is more recognition in every part of the world that we need to do more about it, that we need everyone involved to solving our greatest problems and bringing innovation to life. And so I think everyone's working on it in a different way at maybe different speeds, but it's a lot of similarities too, I would say.
Thank you. Catherine, why do you believe equality creates innovation and not that innovation creates equality. In other words, isn't innovation what causes equality and not the other way around?
I think so. That's from Caleb. I don't know where Caleb is in the audience. That's a really good question, though. I think it is actually a bit of a cyclical type process. So I think they are, you know, innovation can drive equality, equality drives innovation. I think where it's easier for companies to invest in terms of a resource commitment or a budget commitment, et cetera, is going to be in the areas around the diversity angles, thinking about skills building, thinking about dedicated innovation programs. So Carl mentioned one around, putting out the request to see what ideas came back to solve certain solutions. I think that's more within the control of where a company can start in terms of resource capacity, investment capacity, et cetera. So that's kind of why I positioned it as that's kind of a starting point, and then that helps drive an outcome of innovation. But very much so, I think they do feed one another, for sure.
I think
that's a really good question, Caleb.
Virtuous circle again,
it
right?
Is, yeah.
The desire to have equality drives innovation, and innovation drives more equality.
So this next question is around collaboration across the industry. And how are large mining companies, OEMs, and partners collaborating to jointly address industry-wide D&I challenges? What isn't being done yet, and how can we accelerate cross-company collaboration, even with competitors on D&I priorities?
I'll start.
I need to absorb the question.
Yeah, it's a well-worded but long question.
Yeah.
I think we have organizations that can help facilitate this, and I think it already has begun. I do think it isn't deeply done yet. I think the announcement I just talked about with BHP Billiton and Caterpillar is an example of what we need to do a little more, or a lot more widespread in what are those things that would be more helpful to the industry to promote diversity and inclusion, and I'll call it standardize on that and drive those changes across in those areas that we certainly can be common and help each other along that journey.
I think too is the different groups, whether it's the National Mining Association, as companies like your employee resource group. I mean, that's a really interesting concept. I think as companies see things that are working, sharing that. I mean, it's only going to help all of us to further diversity and inclusion. And so sharing those amongst the different organizations and groups, I think, will really help as well.
Yeah. I think in some ways it comes down to having a very clear shared purpose of what those different organizations are working towards. So a practical example that springs to mind for me where I've seen this work quite effectively is I was lucky to have the opportunity maybe 7 or so years ago now helping build a new mining organization in a developing economy. And that, they were starting from building the company, building the operation itself. So that involved a broad range of OEMs, partners, service providers, different organizations, et cetera. And why I saw that work quite effectively is everyone was operating around a shared goal and a shared outcome that we were trying to get towards. And in addition to that, we were helping build the capability for the local workforce in that economy, emerging economy, to be able to run the operation. And that was also part of the shared goal. So I think that to me kind of resonates as a really critical element for how you get this right or how it could be accelerated, helping define what that shared goal and the shared outcome is that gives people a sense of purpose for what they're working towards.
So this is a big question for right at the end, but I wonder if you can maybe give me an idea of how you see diversity and inclusion in the future, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years. And how will we know when we've reached our goal? Letitia, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're facing employment issues now, and I think we're not going to solve any of those without figuring out how to solve diversity and inclusion. So it's something that has to be done for us to be successful, to develop the workforces that we're going to need to continue to do the things that we need to do. And so we need to all work together and figure out how to do it, and make sure, like I said in my presentation, it's not just for us, it's not just on the company. We need to do it beyond the company in education and making sure we get students into the pipeline that fit that diversity, whether it's supporting STEM or just the building trades. We need to continue that pipeline, and we need that diversity to start from a very young age to get kids into the programs so that we can feed them into our workforce.
My reaction to your question is I don't think there is any end goal. I think it's a continual nurturing, continual evolution, just like any, business strategy almost. It just continues, it kind of works towards infinity. There is no end goal. Same as innovation, right? I keep going back to the topic of innovation, but there is no end goal of innovation. It continues to grow and get better. Yeah, that was my immediate reaction when you asked that, what's the end goal? How do we know when we get there? I don't think we do get there. I think it just continues to get better.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, to build on that, I think my wife's view of what equality was when we were 20 years old is different than what my daughter thinks equality is now at that age. And that's good. And so I agree with you. I don't think it's a destination, it's a journey that will continue to change. But as Letitia said, I think what will help with the momentum is the real need, the recognition of it is one step, but as we have more workforce constraints, the need to get better at this is going to become even stronger, and I think that'll help the momentum, but I don't know that we'll ever get to the end.
Right. Okay, well, I'd like to just give a summary of sorts, and that is that we have big challenges ahead of us, but I really believe that we have huge opportunities that will require different skill sets and different approaches than in the past. So panelists, I'd like to thank you very much for giving us a look inside your organizations and a look at how technology will complicate, but mostly help us in the future as we progress on our diversity and inclusion journey. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Turn it up. Somebody's